Now then, everybody, going to be reacting to the video. This is Pope was right, Vance is wrong. So get straight into it. If you want to watch this without me talking, link is in the description. And from this point forward, I presume you're going to want to know what I've got to say as well.
This about Pope Leo's comments on the ongoing war in Iran.
When the Pope says that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword, there is more than a 1,000-year tradition of just war theory. Okay? Now, we can, of course, have disagreements about whether this or that conflict is just, but I think that it's important, in the same way that it's important for the Vice President.
I mean, I will just quickly say, I do wonder about the Crusades sometimes. They were indeed God's will or not. I mean, I would presume they are, but there's still part of me that wonders, you know, if God will not call us to sin in his name, why would he call for warfare? But at the same time, it did extend his kingdom, so
United States to be careful.
Although I would say yes, I'd land predominantly in it was a holy war.
When I talk about matters of public policy, I think it's very, very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology.
Within hours, the USCCB's Committee on Doctrine, the body specifically charged with clarifying Catholic teaching, issued a formal statement. They cited the Catechism, affirmed the Pope's authority, and made it very clear that Leo was not freelancing. He was applying a tradition that the Church has held for over 1,000 years. So who is right about just war theory? The Vice President, who says the Pope should be more careful with his theology, or the Doctrinal Committee of the United States bishops, who say the Pope is faithfully exercising his ministry as the Vicar of Christ? In this video, I want to walk you through the actual theology, because once you understand what just war theory actually says...
And I'll just say anyway, just in case anybody's wondering, I am neither Catholic nor American, so I don't really have a dog in this fight, but I'm interested to see what he has to say about this.
The answer is pretty obvious. Now, before we get into the theology, I want to explain why a Catholic apologist like me is making a video about war. Some of you know my story, but for those of you that don't, I'm a convert to Catholicism. I came into the church from Protestantism, and the single biggest issue I had to work through before I could become Catholic was the papacy. Not the Eucharist, not Mary, the papacy. Because if the Catholic claims about the Pope are true, that changes everything. And if they're false, the whole thing falls apart. So I studied it very carefully for a long time, and one of the things that convinced me was the connection between St. Peter in Matthew 16 and a figure named Eliakim from the Old Testament. I'm not going to discuss all of that here. The point is that I came to believe that Peter and his successors hold a real office of authority, established by Christ, with real binding and loosing power over the church. I came away from that...
Okay, so I'm not 100% sure. I'm presuming he's saying, from what I understand, I'm unsure with some of this theological vernacular at the minute. But, you know, it's the general theory that, you know, as you said earlier, the Pope is God's vicar and supreme authority stored on earth to enact out God's will or interpret it, maybe. I mean, I would say, not being Catholic, I don't really buy too much into the whole authority thing. I kind of think that we all have authority given Christ. It's up to other people if they want to listen to us or not. You know, God loves us all the same. So I don't know. I don't really buy into the fact that we should all just listen to the Pope all the time. But anyway, I'll carry on.
Study convinced, not as a feeling, not as a preference, as a conclusion from careful study of Scripture. So when a vice president goes on national television and tells millions of people that the Pope should be more careful with his theology, that's not a political disagreement I can just sit out. That's a challenge to the reason I became Catholic in the first place.
Let's go there now. And I always got to say, I know I'm interrupting now, but...
So that's why I'm making this video, not as a political commentator, as an apologist. Okay, so let's talk about just war theory, because...
Yeah, I'm like the other way around. I'm mainly interested in politics. It's only recently, since being undergoing transformation from Christ, that I've had to be more invested in theology.
Vance brought it up, but I don't think he understands what he invoked. Just war theory is not a permission slip for war. It's the opposite. It's a set of conditions so strict that most wars in human history would fail to meet them. The tradition goes back to St. Augustine, was developed by St. Thomas Aquinas, and is formally codified in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The Catechism, paragraph 2309, lays out 4 conditions. All 4 must be met simultaneously, not 1 or 2, all 4 at the same time. Here they are. First, the damage inflicted by the aggressor must be lasting, grave, and certain. Second, all other means of ending it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. Third, there must be serious prospects of success. And fourth, the use of arms must not produce evils worse than the evil being eliminated. And the Catechism adds, and this is really important, that the power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. Now,
So I'll just quickly say I'm not really aware of any of this, but it is obviously very interesting to see what else we discover as we dive down this rabbit hole.
Catechism also says something I want to be very upfront about. Okay, right after listing these conditions, it says this: the evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have responsibility for the common good. That word prudential really, really matters. It means reasonable Catholics applying these criteria in good faith can reach different conclusions about a specific war. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you that every Catholic who supports this war is a bad Catholic. That's not how this works. That's not what I believe.
And I'll just say, just speaking as purely as a British citizen, I'm not in favour of us being drawn into it. That's what I'm not in favour of. For years, Americans have told us that, me personally anyway, on the internet, that they don't need us to win wars. So, go ahead and knock yourself out without us getting involved this time, if you don't mind. Rather not get involved in another forever war, which is what this appears to be turning into, in my opinion. It's turning into yet another conflict. It'll just not end anytime soon. It'll end up being worse than what it started with. Maybe not to the extent of Afghanistan, but it'll be somewhere along those lines. Certain. But anyway, we'll continue with the video.
But, and please hear this, okay, the existence of disagreement does not mean that just anything goes. There's a framework, it has teeth, you actually have to engage it. So let's do that. Let's go back to the first condition, the damage inflicted by the aggressor. That word aggressor is doing enormous work. One paragraph earlier in 2308, the Catechism says a nation can only take up the sword in self-defense once all peace efforts have failed. The whole framework presupposes that you're responding to an aggression. You are the defender, not the initiator. Think of it sort of like personal self-defense, because the logic is basically identical. Someone breaks into your house and comes at you with a weapon. You have every right to defend yourself. No one disputes that. But your right to use force is grounded in the fact that you're responding to an actual present threat. He's the aggressor, you're the defender. Just war theory applies this exact same logic to nations. That's the foundation. Keep it in mind because everything that follows builds on this principle. Okay, so here's where it gets really important. There's a distinction in just war thinking that I think most people, including most Catholics, don't know about. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Catholic philosopher Edward Fazer, who is a Thomist, a political conservative, nobody's idea of a left-wing Catholic, he's written extensively about this. He draws a critical line between preemptive war and a preventive war. So let me make this very concrete, because I think once you
Okay, I will just say I'm not really 100% sure at the moment of the distinction between those two, so it'll be interesting to see what that distinguishment is.
You see it with like real scenarios, you'll never confuse these two again. Scenario 1, you're in your front yard, your neighbor is walking out of his house, he's got a rifle in his hands, he starts to aim it at you and starts walking towards you. He hasn't pulled the trigger yet, but the threat is immediate, it's certain, it's obvious. If you act first to neutralize that threat, that's preemptive self-defense. You didn't just wait around to get shot, but the attack was clearly coming. Okay, no reasonable person would call you the aggressor in that situation. That's preemptive war. Country B is actively preparing to attack country A. The threat is imminent. Country A strikes first to head it off. The tradition says that this can be justified because you're still fundamentally defending yourself. Now, scenario number 2. Your neighbor owns a gun. He's made some hostile comments over the years. He has a temper. You think that someday, maybe, he might use that gun against you. So you walk over to his house and attack him first. That situation is not self-defense. That's just assault. Okay, every legal system on earth recognizes this difference. It doesn't matter how unpleasant your neighbor was. It doesn't matter that he owns a gun. It doesn't matter that he said threatening things. You cannot attack someone based on what they might hypothetically do at some unspecified point in the future. That's preventive war, and Fazer is very clear about this. The natural law tradition forbids it. You cannot wage war against a country simply because it might someday threaten you. Here's like another way to think about it. So imagine going before a judge and saying something like,
we'll quickly just say, like, I kind of got that. I understand it now. I don't think I can really articulate it any better or even add to that at the minute. So we'll see what else he has to say on the subject.
Your Honor, I attacked my neighbor because I believed that in 5 years he might buy a more powerful weapon, and at that point he might decide to use it against me. So I just went in and attacked him. No judge on earth would accept that defense, but that's essentially the argument for preventive war. And if you've seen the movie Minority Report, it's a great movie, by the way, you already understand this problem sort of intuitively. The whole premise of this film is that a police unit arrests people for murders that they haven't yet committed based on...
I've seen the film. I haven't read the book quite yet, though, so I should really read it. If you, I would like to maybe set up a book club one day. So if you're watching this and you think that'd be a good idea, let me know. Maybe I'll get around to reading Minority Report of them one day, but at the minute I'm reading quite a bit of Adrian Tchaikovsky, so I will get around to it at some point.
The visions of these like precogs who can see the future, and the entire moral tension of the movie is exactly this question. Even if you're highly confident that someone will commit a crime, is it just to punish them before they've done it? The movie's answer, and I think the right answer, is no. The system is fundamentally unjust even when it works, and it doesn't always work. There's a Minority Report, a dissenting vision.
Although I would say now as a Christian anyway, and knowing that we have free will, I would say that it would be unjust anyway because you still have choice. Maybe this is arguing, in the realms of like a sort of multiverse that this universal strand that you're in, you're going to commit that crime. But I don't know. I would say... it's a good thought experiment, Minority Report, but I would say it is now unrealistic outside the parameters of how reality is constructed, in my own opinion.
Which means the future isn't as certain as the system claims. Tom Cruise's character was predicted to commit a murder. He doesn't. The precogs were wrong. The parallel to preventive war here is almost exact. We're highly, highly confident that Iran will develop nuclear weapons and might use them someday. So we're just going to strike now before it happens. You're essentially punishing a country.
Yeah, I will just quickly say, as I said in one of my videos, like considering that the USA wants a peace deal where they agreed to never make nuclear weapons, pie in the sky. I mean, will they ever make nuclear weapons? I don't want to say. I'd find it unlikely, but they never... Even if they would agree to it, they're still going to continue to try and make nuclear weapons. They're not... Agreement to not make them doesn't mean diddly squat. I mean, I know that the USA has to try and muscle them into it, but I just think it's just childish.
For a crime it hasn't yet committed based on a prediction of what it might do. And just like in the movie, the predictions can be wrong. We know this because of Iraq. The intelligence community was, highly confident about weapons of mass destruction. They were wrong. Hundreds of thousands of people died over a prediction that turned out to be false. Fazer put it very simply. He said, while just...
I think that turned a lot of people in my country against some of these, forever wars that we can get roped into, where the end result it wasn't the war that they said it was going to be, or the reasoning for going to war was not what it would have appeared to be, what the stories that they gave us.
Just war doctrine allows preemptive war, military action to head off an attack that is just about to be launched. It forbids preventive war, military action against a country that merely might someday attack. The Pope and the USCCB are simply upholding this teaching. So now that we know how just war theory works, we can now turn our attention to the current conflict in Iran. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes against Iran. They killed the supreme leader and targeted nuclear facilities, military infrastructure, and government sites across the country. Iran responded with missiles and drones against Israel, U.S. bases in the Gulf, and the Arab states. 40 days of combat. A ceasefire happened on April 8th. The administration says that Iran's nuclear program posed an unacceptable threat. Okay, but
I'm going to nitpick here, but can we just please start just calling it Iran? I don't know why Americans can pronounce other words properly, like Italy and Iceland, but Iran, it's Iran. Iran.
The question we have to ask, the question that the just war tradition forces us to ask, is this: was this a preemptive war, or was it a preventive war? Was the neighbor pointing the rifle, or was the neighbor basically just shopping for a gun? Now, at this point, I want to deal honestly with the strongest counter arguments against what I've said, because I think you guys deserve that. But there are three, and each of them has some force, but I don't think any of them ultimately succeeds. The first objection is that Iran has been the aggressor for decades through proxies. This is probably the best logical argument for the war. Iran has funded Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis as proxies have attacked American forces, American bases, American allies for years. You could argue that the U.S.
I mean, that is right, to be fair. That's why I'm not completely against the war. I just don't really want to be involved in it, in our country and our tax money being involved in it. To be honest, I think the USA and Israel can sort it out amongst themselves. I don't see why we need to again be roped into it.
The U.S. isn't really starting this war. It's responding to one that's been ongoing for a long time. Iran just drew the first blood ages ago. And you know what? There is actually something to that. Let's put it in our neighbor's terms. Okay, imagine your neighbor, instead of just holding a gun or having a gun in his house, he's been hiring teenagers to throw rocks at your house. They've keyed your car, they're harassing your family, and they've been doing this for years. That's a real grievance. Okay, you'd have every right to be furious in that situation. You might even be justified in taking some kind of forceful action against that. But here's the question you have to ask. Does that justify bulldozing his house, eliminating his whole family, and reshaping the whole neighborhood?
No.
Because that's the gap between what Iran's proxies have done and what the US actually did on February 28th. The strikes didn't just target the proxy networks, they targeted regime change. They killed the supreme leader, they bombed infrastructure across the country. Even if Iran's proxy aggression gives you some sort of just cause, the response still has to be proportionate. Okay, remember, that's the Catechism's fourth criteria. Burning down your neighbor's house because he hired teenagers to key your car, that is not proportionate. The tradition requires proportionality, and the scale of what happened on February 28th goes far beyond responding to proxy activity. And keep in mind that this is not the actual justification the administration has been giving for the war. They've been blaming it on the possibility of nuclear weapons. So let's go there next. The second objection is if we wait until Iran goes nuclear, it'll be way too late. Now, I want to take this one very seriously because I think it's the one that most of you probably feel most strong.
It's interesting because I do not agree with that one at all. And if that's the one that most people are most heated about, that explains why some of the videos I've already kind of covered on this subject have been downvoted so much. Why do people want this war so much?
About. The argument is basically this. A nuclear Iran would be an extreme existential threat. Once they have that sort of technology, that bomb, military action at that point becomes impossible. The only window to act is before the threat is fully realized. If you wait until the threat is truly imminent, you've waited way too long. Now, I understand the fear behind this line of thinking, but I want you to see what it's actually asking for. Your neighbor, going back to the neighbor analogy, suppose that he's shopping for a gun, okay? He's been to a few different stores, he's been reading.
Be good if he can talk me into this one.
Reading about firearms online. He hasn't bought one yet, and he certainly hasn't pointed one at you, but you're worried that once he's armed, confronting him will be much more dangerous. So you go and attack him while he's unarmed, while he's still shopping for guns. Yes, you might feel safer after you attack him, but you've just assaulted an unarmed man based on what he might be able to do in the future. I had to attack him before he got too dangerous to attack is still preventive logic, okay? The fact that the window is closing doesn't change the moral character of the act. This is Minority Report logic. He's going to commit a crime in the future, so we need to stop him before he commits it. The tradition says, no, that is not morally justified. Not because the fear is irrational, it may not be, but because you cannot punish someone for something they haven't done. Not in criminal justice, not.
So yeah, it looks like I agree with the Pope then, I suppose. If I'm understanding this argument correctly. I'm by no means an expert on this kind of stuff.
Not in self-defense, not in war. And as I mentioned, then Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, warned before Iraq that the concept of preventive war does not appear in the Catechism. The Church has been consistent on this for a very long time. So what does the tradition say when the threat is real, but it's not imminent? Well, you pursue every non-military option with genuine seriousness, which brings us to a very inconvenient fact. The third objection is that the US government has intelligence that the Vatican does not. Now look, this is a fair point. Okay, the president gets classified briefings, the Pope doesn't get those briefings. Maybe the administration knows something about some sort of imminent threat that.
I mean, I kind of wonder exactly what they might have that would change the opinion of the Pope so much. Potentially, I mean, I doubt it. I kind of think the Pope would still take the same logical position he is doing. And that's not to say that is one correct position. I understand the Pope's logic better than I do J.D. Vance's logic. That's all I'm saying. Get mad all you want, I suppose. Let me know in the comments.
Changes the whole picture. But there are problems with this. First, what the administration has said publicly doesn't support the preemptive case. They've spoken vaguely about imminent threats, but if you've been paying attention to the news, the actual argument that they give has always been about what Iran might someday be capable of. That's prevention. It's not preemption. But secondly, and this is the killer, like negotiations were actively underway. The US and Iran were in indirect nuclear talks in Geneva, mediated by Oman. The third round wrapped up just 2 days before the strikes began.
Okay, just another one here for you Americans. Oman, not Oman, Oman.
The mediator reported significant progress. More talks were scheduled for the following week. You don't need a security clearance to evaluate that. You don't need classified intelligence. The second condition in the Catechism says that all other means must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective, but the means were working. The mediator said so publicly. Launching strikes while a mediator is reporting significant progress is like punching your neighbor in the face in the middle of a mediation session and then claiming you had no other choice. It's like arresting the suspect in Minority Report while the Minority Report itself is flashing on screen saying this prediction might be wrong. You can't claim last resort when you abandon the process that was making progress. And then, of course, there's...
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that point at the minute. I suppose he's just sort of fleshing it out and not much I can add.
The cost of all of this. In the opening hours of the war, a missile hit a girls' elementary school in Manab. Between 165 and 180 people were killed. Most of them were children. Okay, over 1,000 civilians died during this conflict. Global trade was disrupted. Flights were halted. The whole region was completely destabilized. The fourth condition in the Catechism says that the use of arms must not produce evils worse than the evils being eliminated. Again, think about that. The evil being prevented was a nuclear program that hadn't produced any weapons. The evil produced was dead children, a regional crisis, and a destabilized Middle East. The cure cannot be worse than the disease. Now, that's not my opinion. Okay, that's the Catechism. Now, am I saying that...
Yeah, it's a complicated one for sure. I mean, I can't say I'm 100% against it. I'm on America's side overall. I'm obviously not on the side of the Iranian regime, but I wouldn't say it's been going exactly like the USA planned. The regime is more entrenched. They're not going to get the quick, easy win that they wanted, especially without, having to do the old boots on the ground, as everybody likes to refer to it.
Every Catholic who supports this war is wrong or irrational? No, not at all. Okay, prudential disagreement is very real, and smart people on both sides disagree. But when the Pope, the USCCB president, the military archbishop, the doctrinal committee, and one of the most important, prominent conservative Catholic philosophers alive all independently reach the same conclusion, that's not like one fringe voice. That's the tradition speaking with remarkable unity. You can disagree, sure, but you can't just dismiss it. So now let's come back to what Pope Leo actually said, because I think Vance just got it completely wrong.
No, so it should be straight from the horse's mouth.
Vance claimed Pope Leo said God is never on the side of those who wield the sword, and invoked just war theory as a correction, as if the Pope were like some sort of pacifist who doesn't understand his own tradition. But look, that is not what Pope Leo said. Okay, what he said in his Palm Sunday homily was that God does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war. He was quoting Isaiah, "Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood." And the USCCB's doctrinal committee understood.
It seems pretty reasonable to me, to be fair. I mean, God wouldn't be on the side. As I said earlier, I suppose, in the video, God will not call us to sin in his name. So if you're praying for war, not really going to help you, unless it's like the wolves are at the gates coming in through the doors and you fight them off straight away. You're potentially going to help you then. I don't want to make definitive statements for what God will and not do in these instances, but yeah.
Exactly what Leo meant. Their statement reads like this, okay? A constant tenet of that 1,000-year tradition is a nation can only legitimately take up the sword in self-defense once all peace efforts have failed. That is, to be a just war, it must be a defense against another who actively wages war, which is what the Holy Father actually said. He does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war. Did you catch that? The doctrinal committee is saying Leo's statement isn't a departure from just war theory. It is just war theory. God's blessing is with the man defending his family from an active intruder, not with the man who walks across the street to attack his neighbor who might someday be a threat. Okay, one is the defender, the other one is waging war. Leo was drawing exactly the line the tradition has always drawn. He wasn't being sloppy with his theology, he was applying it precisely. It was Vance who got the theology wrong. Now, I don't want to be unfair to Vance, so let me say what I think is actually going on here, because I think it's more sympathetic to him than what most people are assuming. Now, I don't think that if it was up to Vance, I don't think he would have actually started this war. If you listen to his pre-vice presidential interviews and writings, he was consistently skeptical of foreign intervention. He was critical of the Iraq war. He talked about the failures of American adventurism abroad. That was a core part of his political identity. And then Trump launched strikes on Iran. And suddenly Vance is standing behind this podium trying to defend a war that I don't think actually matches his convictions. And you can see it in the interview. He's flailing. He invokes just war theory, but gets it wrong. He tells the Pope to be careful about theology. He tries to frame the whole thing as a routine.
I will say it's disappointing in one way as well, because I actually quite like JD Vance. I don't really have anything against him. I think, the memes are funny. He seems like a good guy. I do believe him to be a man of God, to be honest, but this is a bit of a banana skin seems to have slipped on.
Policy disagreement that isn't particularly newsworthy. None of it lands because none of it is coming from a place of genuine conviction. It's coming from a place of damage control. So what I think happened is actually pretty simple. Trump made this decision. Okay, he made it in the way that he makes all of his decisions. And Vance was left trying to reverse engineer a coherent defense from inside of a paradigm that doesn't actually support what happened. He's not articulating a principled position. He's protecting the president. And in the process, he's saying things about the Pope, about the church, and about the tradition that he almost certainly knows aren't true. And look, despite what it might sound like, I do have compassion for that. He's the vice president, okay? He serves at the
what do you think of the comments? You have to let me know. Is he really unaware? Or does he, is he unaware, or does he know that he's contradicting his own faith? I presume he's Catholic. I'm not 100% certain on all of this, but I consider it to be a misinterpretation, or he's being slightly ignorant, but maybe he's malicious, who knows?
Pleasure of the president. If he came out and said, look, guys, the Pope is right, this war doesn't meet just war criteria, his political career would be over by Friday. Okay, I get that. All right, the pressures are real, and I don't pretend to understand what it's like to carry those. But here's where my compassion just pushes straight up against a brick wall. Okay, this is exactly my point. It's exactly why the church has a tradition of moral teaching that exists independent of political power. The whole reason just war theory matters, the whole reason the papacy matters, is for moments exactly like this, when political pressure pushes one way and the truth pushes another way. Vance, as vice president, cannot go against the president. Okay, I understand.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm not Catholic, and I'm not going to be hold myself to everything that the Catholics believe. I do find it inspiring, and I do draw from it. Watch a lot of Catholic stuff, so not entirely against it, and it is nice to have such a sort of long storied tradition.
But as a Catholic, he's supposed to be willing to go against anyone that the faith demands. That's what conversion means. I know this because I went through it. Okay, that's what it means to say, I believe and profess all that the Holy Catholic Church believes, teaches, and proclaims to be revealed by God. It means the faith, your faith as a Catholic, comes first, not when it's easy, but when it's hard, especially when it's hard. But here's what really...
I'd say just as a Christian, man, if you're doing it properly, then life becomes more complicated. I wouldn't say life becomes harder. I kind of think that, God helps us, so life gets better. But it gets more complicated because you have these extra rules, and I'm not following these rules just because I want to, because it's religion. I understand the fundamental components of reality which make it so that I have to really observe these rules, because there are consequences that I would not be in favor of should I ignore as God has deemed.
Frustrates me about all of this. I'm not asking him to fall on his sword. He didn't have to denounce the war. He doesn't have to resign or anything like that. He could have said something very simple and true, something like this: I have deep respect for the Holy Father and his moral witness. Catholics can have good faith disagreements on policy, and I believe this administration is acting in the interest of national security. But I take the church's teaching on war and peace seriously, and I always will. That's it. Okay, that would have honored his office, his faith, the truth, all at the same time. It would have cost him nothing to say that.
I agree.
But instead, he told the Pope to be careful about theology. He put the vice presidency and the papacy on the same level, as if they carry equal authority. He said this, quote, in the same way that it's important.
Well, I don't know. I still think that we all carry equal authority. God loves us all the same. So I don't know. I'd still dismiss that. It's the content of the argument, not who's presenting the argument. I don't care what Pope says what. It's the content of what they're saying that I'm concerned with, not the person that's saying it.
Important for the vice president to be careful about public policy. I think it's very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. But for a Catholic, those are not the same thing. Okay, the vice president's authority comes from an election. The Pope's authority on faith and morals comes from Christ himself, from the keys given to Peter, from the office I studied for years before I became Catholic. Equating them is not humility. It's a demotion of the papacy. It's also just really condescending, like Pope Leo doesn't care about being careful about theology. Like, what? The doctrinal committee said it very plainly. They said, when Pope Leo XIV speaks as supreme pastor of the Universal Church, he is not merely offering opinions on theology, he is preaching the gospel and exercising his ministry as the vicar of Christ. That's basically as close to like a direct institutional rebuke of a sitting vice president as the American Catholic Church has ever issued. The bishops felt the need to publicly clarify that the Pope has the authority to say what he said. That tells you how much damage Vance's words did. And the tragedy is, I think Vance knows all of this. Okay, I think he knows that the Pope is within his rights and that obviously the Pope is careful with his theology. I think he knows that tradition doesn't support what happened. I think he's a smart enough man and a serious enough convert to see what's directly in front of him. But he's chosen to protect the president instead of telling the truth. And that's not navigating a difficult situation. That's sacrificing your integrity. And once you do it on camera, it's very hard to get it back. Dr. Ed Fazer put it very simply. The Pope and the USCCB are simply upholding this teaching. It's Vance who departed from it, not Leo. Now, I want to read the final lines of the USCCB Doctrinal Committee statement just one more time for you guys. The consistent teaching of the Church is insistent that all people of goodwill must pray and work toward lasting peace while avoiding the evils and injustices that accompany all wars. That's the tradition. That's what the Pope is defending. And it's what I became Catholic to defend. Not because someone told me to, but because I studied the claims of the Church, including the claims about the papacy, and I became convinced that they were true. If they are true, which they are, they're true all of the time, not just when it's comfortable. So we need to pray for peace. We need to pray for the people of Iran. We need to pray for our leaders and pray that the Church will always have the courage to speak the truth, even when the most powerful people in the world tell her to be quiet. In the name of the...
Amen. So yeah, I mean, I broadly agree on this one, I suppose. I don't have much to qualm with other than the point about how hierarchy, is Pope right just because he's the Pope. I don't think personally what he said at the end there, because I was still guided to the Holy Ghost by means of a different church. I still underwent the transformation and everything. And Catholics say things like only Catholics go to heaven and stuff like that. I kind of think they're being a bit prideful, probably harboring a religious spirit. But this seems to be a good video. Can't find much fault with it. I'm on the side of the Pope, so if you dislike that, I suppose that's you have to deal with. If you like what I've had to say, I suppose, on this subject in this video, feel free to like and subscribe. I have recently only just come to Christ this last Christmas. I uploaded my my testimony, which I suppose I'll link now just at the end of the video if you're still here, and you can check that out. And if you wanted to check this out without me talking as well, the link for this will be in the description. I'll see you in the next video. Toodaloo.